All right, joining me now is the Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He's a member of some important committees here, the Senate Armed Services and the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, I want to pick up right from where Keir left off. Keir is saying that it appears the United States is trying to achieve its objective in sending a message to these Iranian-backed militias to not get involved and to certainly not attack U.S. installations and troops. At the same time, to not escalate this into a regional war starts to become very blurry as to what an escalation is. There have been 160 attacks plus on U.S. troops, and then what we saw last night. What's your sense of it?
Well, Ali, you're asking the right question. There has to be a consequence for anyone that kills American troops. And so going against those groups identified as responsible for the deaths of these three reservists from Georgia, very understandable, and that's within the president's self-defense powers. But the president has said, with respect to the attacks on the Houthis in the Red Sea, that they don't expect the attacks to de-escalate. More missiles fired at Houthis is likely to lead to more missiles fired on ships in the Red Sea. And so the strategy of these attacks and then hoping to de-escalate thus far isn't working. And I think there's only one path to de-escalation right now. The U.S. should pursue it with vigor, and that's a hostage deal to release hostages still held by Hamas. You'll remember that in the first hostage release, there was a pause that enabled humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, and these groups in the region that were fomenting attacks on the United States dramatically de-escalated their operations. And so CIA Director Burns is in the Middle East working on this. I think all focus now should be on a hostage deal. That would be good for hostages and their families. It would likely be accompanied by a significant pause in hostilities in Gaza. We could get much more humanitarian aid in, and that would be the most likely path to see de-escalation right now.
So this is, I'm glad you brought those in. They're two separate issues, but they are deeply connected here. Is there some concern, because I have spent the week feeling more optimistic than I have since October 7th about this deal that has been starting to take form between the CIA, Mossad, the Qatari prime minister, and the Egyptians, and the fact that the Israelis, despite Netanyahu's stated public misgivings, have said that they could be on side with something that looks like this deal, and Hamas not having dismissed it out of hand either. Do these attacks, the attacks on Tower 22 and these retaliatory attacks, tell me the way in which that complicates the possibility of a deal that could end the Israel-Gaza war, at least lead to a ceasefire?
Well, it complicates it in one sense, Ali, but it also may underline how critical it is. In a way, I worry that we'd sort of have lost focus on the hostages. We were focused on the military operation in Gaza, and then how do we counterstrike against the Houthis? But I think hostages are the key to this. First, there's a humanitarian imperative that they should be released. So that is the beginning point. But second, the only evidence that we have about what will produce a de-escalation was the first hostage release deal, which did produce a de-escalation. And obviously, if you get into a significant humanitarian pause when hostages are released, you can negotiate to extend the pause. You can negotiate for more robust delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Israel has a right to defend itself, but most of us have been extremely disappointed about the way Israel has throttled the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza to help suffering people who have nothing to do with Hamas. We need to up the pace of humanitarian aid. That can happen during a pause. And that also gives us an opportunity to discuss a lengthening of the pause. That will be the most likely path to de-escalation. And it's also the path that I think has the most humanitarian imperative behind it.
So, Senator, you and I have been talking for years, and I love the way you think things through, and I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. The one thing that worries me is when talking about Hamas, we talk a lot about Qatar as the intermediary that we use, a country very friendly to the United States where we've got bases. But we do know that Hamas is also influenced by Iran. Is there a danger in these retaliatory strikes that Iran says to one of its allies, one of these proxy groups, Hamas, now's not the time to make a deal as a result of this?
It's possible, but what we're seeing, Ali, and it's been publicly reported, that Iran is also, while they are supporting these Iranian-backed militia groups are supporting Hezbollah, supporting Hamas, supporting the Houthis, they themselves see danger in a broad escalation in the region. So we're seeing that. And look, from the U.S. standpoint, it would be foolish for the United States to be involved in another war in the Middle East. It would be absolutely foolish. We have a very intense focus right now on trying to help Ukraine succeed in its defense of its sovereignty against a dictator who's illegally invaded it. Vladimir Putin loves the world's attention being drawn to the Middle East. Yep. We've said that the pacing challenge for the United States in the 21st century is the U.S.-China relationship. Xi Jinping would love for the United States to get bogged down in the Middle East. There's some in the Middle East who, for their own reasons, wouldn't mind us getting bogged down there. It would be foolish for us to be involved in a war in the Middle East. Should we support democratic allies? Sure, we should. But to have U.S. troops involved in protracted hostilities in the Middle East would be foolish, and it would suggest we hadn't learned anything from the last 2.5 decades. So there's a lot of danger right now. As Keir indicated, it's a tense situation, but there is an ongoing discussion about hostages that I believe could be the key to de-escalation. Let's keep our focus on that and not get distracted.
You're never one to be foolishly optimistic, but I'm with you on this. I think this could end up well if everybody plays it as carefully as they do. Care in the next few hours and days is going to be very important. Senator, thanks for starting us off this morning. I always appreciate it. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He's a member of both the Senate Foreign Relations and the Armed Services Committees.